Good afternoon. I'm Ward Farnsworth, Dean of the University of Texas School of Law. I'm serving as moderator of our next panel, the subject of which is diverse pathways to the legal profession, law faculty hiring, the judiciary, and judicial clerkships. I'd like to start by thanking the University of Houston Law Center and the SMU Law School, and especially the deans of those law schools, Len Baines and Jennifer Collins, for their great work on this event and for putting together such an excellent panel of speakers to share thoughts with us about these important questions. I'll start by introducing each of our panelists and then invite each of them to offer their perspectives on our topic today. The Honorable Roger Gregory is Chief Judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. He's a graduate of Virginia State College. What's that? And the University of Michigan Law School. Judge Gregory is the first African-American to sit on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, where he has served since December of 2000. His many awards and distinctions include the Washington Bar Association's Charles Hamilton Houston Merit Medallion, the Thurgood Marshall College Fund Award of Excellence, and the University of Richmond School of Law's William Green Award for Professional Excellence. Judge Gregory, welcome. The Honorable Gregg Costa is a judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. He grew up in Richardson, Texas, and is a graduate of Dartmouth College and of the University of Texas School of Law. After law school, he served as a clerk to Judge Raymond Randolph of the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit and for Chief Justice William Rehnquist of the Supreme Court of the United States. He also worked in the Office of the United States Solicitor General. Before his appointment to the bench by President Barack Obama, Judge Costa worked in private practice in Texas and as an assistant United States attorney for the Southern District of Texas. Judge Costa, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Dean.
The Honorable Vanessa Gilmore is United States District Judge for the Southern District of Texas. Judge Gilmore grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland. She's a graduate of Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia, and of the University of Houston Law Center, from which she graduated in 1981. She then had a substantial career in private practice in Houston, during which she also served as president of the Houston YWCA and chair of the Texas Department of Commerce. In 1994, she became the youngest sitting federal judge in the country. Judge Gilmore, welcome and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
The Honorable Nathan Hecht is the 27th Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Texas. He's been elected to the court 6 times, first in 1988 as a justice and most recently in 2014 as Chief Justice. He is the longest serving member of the court in Texas history and the longest tenured Texas judge in active service. He's a graduate of Yale and of the SMU Law School. He clerked after graduation for Judge Roger Robb of the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia and served as a lieutenant in the Navy Reserve Judge Advocate General Corps. He's currently serving as president of the National Conference of Chief Justices, and he's also very active in the court's efforts to assure that Texans living below the poverty level, as well as others with limited means, have access to basic civil legal services. Judge Hecht, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dean.
Professor Meera is the director of the Law School Survey of Student Engagement. She's also a professor of law at the Thomas Jefferson School of Law in San Diego, and she's William H. Neukom Fellows Research Chair in Diversity in Law at the American Bar Foundation. Professor Deo is a graduate of the University of California at Berkeley and of the University of Michigan Law School. She's also the holder of a PhD in sociology from UCLA. Professor Deo has served as a Senate-appointed member of the California Commission on Access to Justice and is chair of the Association of American Law Schools section on law and the social sciences. Her research utilizes empirical methods to investigate institutional diversity, affirmative action, and racial representation. Professor Deo, welcome and thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Dean Daniel Tokaji is the Dean of the University of Wisconsin Law School. He previously served as Associate Dean for faculty and as Professor of Law at the Ohio State University Moritz College of Law. Dean Tokaji is a leading authority in the field of election law and has published many books and articles in that field. He's a graduate of Harvard College and of Yale Law School, and before entering academic life, Dean Tokaji served as a law clerk for Judge Stephen Reinhardt of the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit and worked as a civil rights lawyer. Dean, welcome and thank you for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, with those introductions of our very illustrious panelists complete, let me turn now for some remarks from our first panelist, Judge Roger Gregory. Judge, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Dean. First of all, I'm just so proud and pleased to be among such illustrious jurists and other persons in this great profession of ours. And it's a great pleasure from, I would say, from a boy from Petersburg, Virginia, to do so. Being on the Court of Appeals, one thing I knew about this, I think it requires humility. And I always say that I'm there because of the rope of destiny. I had a chance to grab a hold of it. It was a rope that was woven not by me, but by generations way before me and stained with their blood, sweat, and tears. And I believe that my job is to make sure that I leave rope behind that somebody else can take hold of. So when we talk about issues of Black lawyers, Meera, lawyers of color, and how do we do that? That's what I'm talking, I think of. How do we keep the pipeline open, moving, fresh, and accessible? So here's some of my thoughts about that. First of all, in terms of judicial clerkships, I think what you're fishing for, you go to the place where it is. And that is the first thing is Oscar, for example. My advice is what I do is don't filter so much. There are some judges who filter like, I want a law clerk that's from these 5 schools, this rank, and this GPA. Well, that's fine, but then you get what you fish for sometimes. But I'm telling you, there are many wonderful persons of color and many law clerks out there that are beyond T14 schools, beyond class rank, beyond just GPA. As a matter of fact, I'm saying this tongue in cheek, some of our top schools are pass fail, and they do very well. You'll get that on the way home. But the whole point is some of the filters. So I look beyond it. Matter of fact, I go beyond T50 law schools. Great law clerks, wonderful contributions, small schools, historically Black colleges, and law schools. It's just a fountain of talent. I think God spread talent around quite broadly. The problem is we have not spread opportunity around. So what I try to do is opportunity. Also, I look beyond law review. Look at other journals. Many schools have several journals. And beyond the journals, look at other writing experiences, work experiences, summer experience. Legal aid while you're in law school. I did legal aid when I was at Michigan. I had my first jury trial when I was in law school, 3rd year. I mean, so if you just have this boilerplate sort of implicit and explicit bias as to who is and is not worthy to be a law clerk, you miss out on so many wonderful opportunities to expand that. I look at resumes in terms of public service. People, for example, and this is something I'm not going to say much about law faculty, but you look at people who have an interest in academia, giving them a chance to clerk, judges, lawyers of color, gives them a chance or pipeline. When they go to the combine or they're being recommended for faculty, they have that opportunity to clerk. So I look beyond just clerking for me. How does it open the door for other opportunities for them? Last summer, I had 5 summer interns, and it opens the door. And this Zoom, or not saying Zoom, that's a proprietary name, but in this virtual reality, I had law clerks who were in the Midwest, but they were clerking for me. I mean, they were clerking or interning this summer. And so take those opportunities to widen the net. And the second part, as I move on fast, swiftly, judges. As chief judge, it gives me some advantage because there are a lot of things that I can do. Here's how I think how we can do that. Everybody thinks about, well, you need a senator to nominate you, or you need this and you need political. What you need is an opportunity to be exposed. For example, that is appointments to panels, appointments to rule review, so that judges get to know who African-American lawyers are. They sit at the table with them. So appoint them to CJA panels, representing people of clients and handling cases. Merit selection. I didn't know this before I got on the court, really. And then about it that the federal district, the district court judges appoint the magistrates, and the Court of Appeals appoint the bankruptcy judges. So have merit selection members of minorities on those panels. Let historically Black bar associations know about openings. Those kind of things are so important because, to tell the truth, and when it comes to Article 1 judges are not very diverse. They're not very diverse. The ones that the judges pick are less diverse than the ones that the legislature picks. So this is an opportunity to broaden that net, to get people appointed to these panels and opportunities. Also, judicial conference. Have African-American lawyers speak and present at the judicial conference. Panels, CLEs, all of these things are exposures. Speak to historically Black and bars of color as a judge. Outreach, let people see what it looks like, what it feels like to be a judge. And I say they can see that it's doable, that it's achievable, that somebody cares about it. So I think the whole thing is, if you're going to do better, then you must act, and you must put that rope of destiny there so other people can hold on to it. And I think, Dean, that goes a long ways with showing in these areas that Black law clerks, like judges, matter, and it's so important to our system of justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge, for those great and very practical remarks. And now we'll hear from Judge Gregg Costa.
Well, thanks again for having me here. And thanks really for having this conference on such an important issue that really does present a challenge to the legal profession, to the judiciary, to academia. You know, when I look back at my career and what got me to where I am today in this incredibly wonderful job I have, part of it is I went to Dean Farnsworth Law School. I went to a great public law school that gave me a great education. The other part of it is I was able to have 2 wonderful clerkships. And, you know, when I went to law school, there were no lawyers in my family. I didn't know any lawyers growing up. I never had the dream of becoming a federal judge. It just didn't seem like something that was even within the realm of possibility. And serving as a law clerk really put me on this path. And so I've seen the value that clerkships have, and not just to become a judge, to go into private practice, to go into academia, certainly so many important areas of the legal profession. Having a clerkship is really a sterling credential. And unfortunately, the number of minority law clerks is really abysmally low. The most recent statistics I could find were from 4 years ago. In 2016, in the federal judiciary, 3.5% of law clerks were African American. The state courts, I know we're going to have the Chief Justice speak soon. The state courts did a little bit better, 6.2%. Still a lot of room for improvement there, but better than the feds. Latino law clerks, 4.6%. So especially in this world we're living in, where you know, more and more students are from backgrounds, you know, students of color, it's really a challenge for the judiciary to make sure we're extending this wonderful opportunity to more students. So Chief Judge Gregory spoke to some of the things that can be done. You know, part of it, when you say, why are the numbers so low that I just gave? I think part of it is a lot of minority students, disproportionately so, come to law school not as familiar with the legal profession. So not as familiar with the value of a clerkship. I think even part of it might even be the name. I was speaking to a law student from an immigrant background, and his family was understandably, you know, prideful that he had obtained a law degree and at great financial sacrifice. And their view was, why, you're a lawyer, why would you want to be a clerk? So even some of it is even that name. I think the state courts in Texas, they call them briefing attorneys. So maybe that's probably a better name. I think part of it is financial, right? Again, students of color disproportionately have significant loans, and the clerkship is a financial hit compared to going straight to private practice. Although, a lot of firms do give bonuses that make up some of that once the student gets to the law firm. So I think a lot of this is education, that making sure students in law schools know that the clerkship is incredibly valuable in its own right for what you learn and having the mentorship of a judge. And it's also something that is that credential down the road that's going to open a lot of doors for you. So, I look forward to talking about some of the ideas of what can be done. Chief Judge Gregory mentioned some of those. He mentioned having internships, and there's bar programs that do place minority students in internships during law school. And I think that that solves the problem of the students see the value of clerking for a judge because they're in chambers seeing what a clerk does. And it can also, I usually help my interns get clerkships. So it also gives them a very solid reference who can assist them in the clerkship process. I think at the most basic level, one thing judges need to try to do is just increase the number of clerkships that are out there, right? The more clerkships that are out there, the more students, including minority students, are going to have these opportunities. I wrote an article a couple of years ago because I'm concerned that the number of clerkship opportunities is going down, really for two reasons. One, a lot of judges are increasingly using career law clerks. And two, there's a really strong trend in recent years of clerks who are, it's a second clerkship. They're doing, one at the district court, one at the appellate court. I have some people applying to me who've already done an appellate clerkship. And it's just basic math that for every student who does two, there's a student out there not getting to do one. And so I think the judiciary needs to make sure we're keeping the number of these opportunities as high as it can be. I'll close with one other interesting idea from a friend of mine, Judge Chabria in San Francisco. He wrote an article in the National Law Journal last year saying that judges should employ something from the NFL, the National Football League, called the Rooney Rule, which football fans may know about. It's named after the former owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the NFL has had a real problem with minority hiring among coaches. And the Rooney Rule says that whenever a team is hiring a coach, they have to interview a minority candidate. And so for judges to take it upon themselves to say, as Chief Judge Gregory said, expand that pool, commit to interviewing applicants from not just the elite law schools, applicants from disadvantaged backgrounds. And that's another thing that I think we can do to increase these opportunities. So there's a lot of other things that I look forward to talking to the panel about how we can expand these opportunities and make sure that they're available to students from all kinds of diverse backgrounds.
All right, Judge Costa, thank you so much for those very interesting reflections. And now we'd be very grateful, Judge Gilmore, to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Dean Farnsworth, and hello to everybody this afternoon. I've enjoyed throughout the day logging in occasionally and listening to some of the earlier speakers, and many of them were very astute and very good at making the business case for diversity. I'd like to throw something in to that mix that maybe people haven't thought about or considered in terms of the business case for diversity and the importance of the pipeline of federal judicial clerkships or judicial clerkships period to get into the important roles in the legal profession that are available. And that is something that has happened recently on our court, which is we have changed the way that we select our jury pool in the Southern District of Texas. Heretofore, we had only picked potential jurors from people who were registered to vote, but recognizing that 24 of the 94 United States district courts in the country have in recent years changed the way that they are selecting their jury pools to expand to other means besides just the voter registration, driver's license, and other forms of IDs, with the idea that we want to create a much more diverse jury pool to reflect the communities that we live in. And when we have much more diverse jury pools, I think that it is supports the business case for having more diversity in terms of the lawyers that appear before us in court. Many of the lawyers who have the opportunity to appear as counsel in federal court are people who have previously done judicial clerkships. I hope that and think that some of our audience today are also law clerks. Judge Gregory made a very good point about the fact that serving as judges is something that we do with humility. But I want to raise the opposite suggestion, and that we need to be more forceful about tooting our horn about the opportunities that we are presenting for young lawyers, and letting people know that judicial clerkships are one of the best kept secrets in terms of a path to a wonderful career in the law, particularly if you are interested in litigation. Just from my own time on the bench, I've been on the federal bench now about 26.5 years. I've had 3 of my former law clerks go on to the Department of Justice to be in the honors program, one of whom ended up being the lead counsel in the lawsuit against John Bryant, and he parlayed that into a position as Chief of Staff to Kamala Harris when she was the Attorney General of California. One of my law clerks is the Associate General Counsel of the company that makes Regeneron, the new COVID drug. One is now a law school dean. Another sits on the Court of Appeals in Houston. And one of my former law clerks was the first Black partner at Sussman Godfrey Law Firm. Another in DC actually helped with the confirmation process for Justice Elena Kagan on the Supreme Court. Being a judicial law clerk can be an amazing stepping stone to opportunities like this. And I think that we don't do enough to let people know about the importance of considering taking that 1 year off with actually a reduced salary, 1 or 2 years. Some clerkships are 2 years, and I actually do 2-year clerkships, as an opportunity to launch yourself into an amazing career. I think that law schools could serve an important role in helping to get the word out on that, to the extent that you are inviting judges to come into the law school to talk about judicial clerkships. I think that is wonderful, but to the extent that it is not happening, it needs to happen a lot more. Also, I think that there's a real opportunity for the professors, and I'm speaking to the professors now on our panel, because I have had in the past professors that I've sort of partnered with who've always looked to me to feed students to me as potential law clerks. For many years, my dear friend Charles Ogletree at Harvard would regularly find law students for me to consider for judicial clerkships. And then I ended up becoming friends with another law professor out in California, and he would feed me students. I'm kind of like off everybody's radar right now. I don't have any professors that are looking to me to call me to say, hey, I've got a great student for you. But I welcome the opportunity to have those relationships and encourage professors to seek out those relationships with judges, because one of the things you hear is that, oh, we just can't find anybody. Well, it's everybody's responsibility to try to complete that circle. Professors can reach out to judges, judges can reach out to deans and say, I'd like to speak to your students if you have an occasion that you need someone to speak. I think that all of us can have a role in showing that there are a talented pool of students out there ready, willing, and able to take advantage of the opportunity to do a judicial clerkship. But it takes all of us to recognize the value in it, and all of us to affirmatively take steps to make it happen. One of the things that I've done in my court is I have the picture of every single one of the law clerks who's clerked for me for the last 26 years on the wall of the hallway outside of my chambers. And my judicial assistant tells me that she's shocked at how often people come by to look at all of the pictures of my law clerks and how surprised they seem to be. And sometimes they'll stop and ring the bell and say, wow, you've had really an interesting and diverse mix of law clerks. I said, you know, they're out there. They're not that rare birds. You just have to go and find them. And so I think sometimes just having that little reminder out there in the hallway for people to see when they walk by, to see the diversity of the people that I've had the pleasure of having worked for me as my judicial law clerks over the last 26 years. I think that we all have a role and a place in this process to hold that door open. And I'm happy to talk about some of the programs that I have been able to utilize in the past to help me find law clerks besides the professors that used to feed me clerks, and how these are some opportunities for students to look into if they're interested.
All right. Judge Gilmore, thank you very much for those great thoughts. And now we are going to hear from Chief Justice Nathan Hecht. Chief, we look forward to hearing your views.
Thanks, Dean. And I want to thank Dean Baines and Dean Collins for coming up with the program. Dean Baines called me about it back when we were worrying about the bar exam together. And I told him then I thought it was a great idea, and I was pleased that he would consider inviting me. So it's a privilege to be with you this afternoon. As we look and see what can we do better and why haven't we done better already, I thought we should just look at the lay of the land for a moment. So here are a few statistics. I don't want to bog us down on numbers, but I think the statistics kind of show us the world that we're operating in. The State Bar of Texas, these are all Texas statistics. The State Bar of Texas has probably about 107 or 8,000 members. It was 105 at the end of last year, and there's probably been a couple thousand more since then. It's about 63% male and about 37% female, and the female component has been growing pretty steadily over the years. Now, focusing on this, the number of African Americans in the State Bar of Texas is 5,677. That's about 6% of the members of the State Bar. It's increased 50%, up from 4% 10 years ago. So it has been steadily growing, but that's still a very small number of lawyers in the State Bar. The number of Hispanics is quite a bit higher than that. It's about 10% of the State Bar as opposed to 6%. It has not grown as much over the last 10 years, only about 25%, but it is growing steadily. Texas has 3,219 judges, and they do a demographic study of the courts, of the Texas courts every year. They just completed it. It just so happens yesterday, so this is hot off the press. About like the bar, it's about 2/3 male, the judges in the state judges in Texas. As you may know, we elect judges down here. Maybe not the best way to select judges, but that's what we do. And about 1,900 of them are elected in partisan elections, all but the municipal court judges. The number of African Americans among Texas state judges is just like the bar. It's about 6%, about 177 total. Many more in the trial courts than in the courts of appeals. And the Hispanic component of the Texas Judiciary is quite a bit higher than the component of the State Bar. It's about 18%. So it's really 3 times as many Hispanics as African Americans in the State Bar, in the Texas Judiciary, and quite a few more than the same component in the State Bar. When we go to look for law clerks and we want to encourage Black lawyers, African-American lawyers, and other lawyers of color to consider judicial clerkships, we're probably going to be looking at a fairly small pool of people. And I think one thing we need to think about doing is how do we encourage Black communities, Black colleges, or African Americans in other colleges to consider law as a profession going forward, and to consider law school. We are, I know for our court, we're very dependent on the law schools to encourage students to apply to us to be law clerks, or as Judge Costa said, we used to call them briefing attorneys, and maybe that's a better name for them. But while we do get lots of applicants, the top students always apply from Texas law schools and other national law schools. It would really help if we knew that the law schools were encouraging these minority law students, students of color, African Americans particularly, to consider clerking for a court. Because as Judge Gilmore says, they may just not have thought about it. It's just not something that they contemplated doing. I grew up on a family farm, and I'm kind of like Judge Costa. And it never occurred to me that I would be a lawyer, let alone have a legal clerkship or be on this court for all these years. But for some, it may just be that it just has not been on their horizon and needs to be. So I really hope we are doing all we can in the colleges and law schools to encourage students to look at law as a profession. I'll have to confess that on law clerks or briefing attorneys in the appellate courts of Texas, we've not done very well. Altogether, we have 253 law clerks or staff attorneys working for our courts, and the startlingly low number of African Americans, only 6, and as compared to about 19 Hispanics. So there's a lot to be done to try to encourage African Americans not only in clerkships, but also in the practice of law.
Okay, Chief Justice Hecht, thank you for those very informative remarks. And now we're going to switch gears a little bit. We've heard from 4 judges talking about the judiciary, and now we're going to hear from a couple of law professors about the legal academy, starting with Professor Deo. If you please, Professor Deo.
So thank you so much for including me today. I want to start by thanking Dean Collins and Dean Baines for convening this gathering. And I hope that the schools will be able to take up Kelly Testi on her offer to continue funding into the future so this can be a more common event. And like Chief Justice Hecht, I'm going to start with some statistics. So just 7% of law professors today are women of color, and that includes those who are Black, Asian American, Latina, Native American, Middle Eastern, or multiracial women. The statistics for men of color are just slightly higher at 8%, and white women are about 25%. So that leaves about half of all law faculty today who are white men. Now, there's a tendency when we think about diversity to focus on the numbers alone, but the numbers don't tell the full story. Last year, I published with Stanford University Press the first formal empirical study of law faculty that draws specifically from an intersectional lens to consider the personal and professional lives of law professors, looking specifically at the ways in which race times gender challenges may create unique barriers as well as opportunities for different faculty members. So what else do we know in terms of the statistics? Well, we know that last year, the hiring for faculty members included 50% of all new hires who had a doctoral degree, like a PhD, in addition to a JD. 83% had fellowships before securing a tenure track job. And over 1/3 of all tenure track hires last year had a clerkship and a fellowship and an advanced degree. So that's obviously some tough competition. So you might look at these criteria and think that they are relatively race or gender neutral. But digging a little deeper, who can afford to actually pursue these temporary jobs or advanced degrees? So is a Black woman, for example, as likely to be able to move her partner and her kids to the University of Wisconsin, for the Hasty Fellowship, this very prestigious opportunity for her family to then wait for a couple of years for her to ultimately, hopefully, secure a tenure track position and then move the family again? In addition, people of color, and especially Black women, tend to use big law salaries to provide financial assistance to extended family members. Women of color, and again, Black women and Latinas especially, tend to have the highest debt loads of any race times gender group. And so it's difficult to convince people that it's the right thing to do to leave practice and take what is essentially a low-paying temp job or pursue an advanced degree before they may feel they're eligible to pursue academia. There's also a role to play for role models themselves and mentors. Most of the women of color in my study call themselves accidental law professors. Most had never seen a professor who looked like them when they themselves were in law school, so they just never had a professor with their background as their own professor. And so it just never had occurred to most of them to consider this type of position for themselves. It wasn't unusual for the white men that I included in my study to say that they went to law school specifically to become a law professor. Others met a professor during law school who really took that person under his wing, and usually it was another white male professor. And because they could sort of see themselves in one another, it became a viable path. And so there really aren't many role models for women of color faculty, especially for Black women. In addition, mentorship itself is key. Smart, aspiring faculty members may be able to navigate some of the written rules of the job market, but the unwritten rules, you probably need a guide for that. So in addition to these challenges, my research reveals both outright discrimination and implicit bias that are still at work in law faculty hiring. One of the participants in my study, a Latino male who I call Fermin, said to me, "A colleague told me I was only hired because I'm Mexican." I said, "When has that ever been a positive here?" Similarly, multiple people told me in interviews that their colleagues tend to give alibis to particular candidates and use a different narrative for others. So this is from Vivian, one of my participants. She says, "My colleagues reconstruct reality to explain why the white guy hasn't written as much as opposed to the African-American candidate. I see completely different narratives, like, oh, he's been so busy developing his economic theories for the white candidate, as opposed to, I don't think he's capable to do the level of work for the African-American candidate." So it's not always purposeful either. Sometimes many people tend to hire those who remind them most of themselves or others with whom they are the most comfortable. And so we have to work actively against implicit bias as well if we want legal academia to not be 50% white men, so we don't just reproduce who's already there. So I want to echo Judge Gilmore. One of the participants in my study said directly, it's not rocket science, right? There are people out there and available. I love your wall of dreams. That's how I think of it. And so that's true for so many of the people in my study as well. When I asked them to share possible solutions, there were so many things that individuals can do, and also that are structural improvements that are necessary to address these systemic challenges. So some of the suggestions are actually quite basic, and I was really excited to see that they're similar to what some of the panelists from earlier sessions had said. If you keep doing things the way that you've been doing them, you are most likely to get the same or very similar results. And so we can't just rely exclusively on the same things that we've done previously, or we'll get the same results that we've gotten previously. So you may need to go to your local IP bar association, like one of my participants did, and chat people up and see who's out there and convince people that it might be worth applying. Another person in my study was hired because a local law school noticed that she was working at a law firm nearby and had published something earlier as a student. And so they reached out to her and suggested that she consider a future in law teaching. We also have to focus more on inclusion, not just on diversity. So I know the purpose of today's panel is specifically about hiring, but I want to emphasize the importance of thinking of diversity and inclusion together so that we're not losing people we've spent all this time hiring to them not feeling welcome and as if they belong. So ultimately, we need to give Black women and women of color as a whole the respect that they deserve, not just let a few in the door, but really support them so they can thrive and be their best. I really do believe that doing this is a win, not only for the individuals, but for our students and for legal education as a whole. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for those remarks, Professor Deo. And that brings us to Dean Tokaji, if you could let us have your thoughts on our topic.
Thank you so much, Dean Farnsworth. It is truly an honor to be a part of this panel with such a distinguished group of judges, as well as with Professor Deo, who's done such fantastic research on diversity and inclusion within the ranks of law professors. And that is the subject on which I'm going to focus my remarks. As she has just explained, we as a profession have a long way to go. And I want to start where she finished, with the emphasis on both diversity and inclusion. In other words, it's not enough for us to try to recruit a diverse group of people to serve on our faculties, although that is essential. It's also critical that we include people, and include them not only once they join our faculties, but even at an earlier stage. The main thing I'd like to focus on in the remainder of my remarks is a program that we have here at the University of Wisconsin Law School that is now almost 50 years old and was designed to do just that. And that is the William Hasty Fellowship program that was established in 1973. The Hasty Fellowship is a 2-year program that is designed to prepare post-JD students for careers in law teaching, with a special commitment to diversity and inclusion. It's actually one of the things that brought me to the University of Wisconsin Law School in the first place. I came here, and I'm in my first year as dean, but I came here in large part because I knew that this law school was a place that was deeply committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And a big reason why I knew that is because I knew about the Hasty Fellowship, which is well known by just about everyone in legal academia. It's well known because over the years since it was established in 1973, it has brought so many remarkable people into our profession, becoming law teachers. You know, we talk a lot about mentoring and pipelines these days, but the people who established the Hasty Fellowship here at the University of Wisconsin Law School, well, they were doing pipelines before pipelines were cool. And I have to mention one of the premier leader in establishing the Hasty Fellowship back in 1973, someone I've learned a lot about since becoming dean. That is Professor Jim Jones, who served here starting in the late 1960s and was an emeritus faculty member at the time of his death in 2014. Professor Jones was a true visionary. He was actually born in Little Rock, Arkansas, a few years after there had been a massacre of black sharecroppers there, black sharecroppers who'd organized to obtain fair prices for their cotton crops. He graduated from our law school, UW Law, in 1956, became a distinguished labor lawyer, and joined our faculty in 1969. But he recognized that, in the words of one of the former Hasty Fellows, Thomas Mitchell, who was on our faculty for a while and has just won the MacArthur Award, the MacArthur Genius Award, he believed that law schools and universities had a responsibility to create qualified minority faculty candidates for the teaching market, instead of just seeking to find qualified minority candidates. Another distinguished Hasty Fellow, former Hasty Fellow, was Kim Crenshaw of UCLA and Columbia Law Schools, who has similarly recognized how visionary Professor Jones was in recognizing the need to create a pipeline of minority law teachers. And among those who have passed through the Hasty Fellowship over the years, I'm just going to name a few of them. Mario Barnes, who's the Dean of University of Washington Law School, Ruben Garcia, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, my colleague, Professor Richard Manette at Wisconsin, Cortland Roser-Jones, my former colleague at Ohio State University, and one of my predecessors as Dean of University of Wisconsin Law School, Dan Bernstein, who passed through the Hasty Fellowship before joining law teaching and eventually becoming Dean at University of Wisconsin. So imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and some other law schools have followed the University of Wisconsin's lead in establishing some kind of postgraduate fellowship designed to prepare people to enter law school teaching. If you look on the AALS's webpage on the subject, you'll find some 22 law schools that have some sort of program, although most of them are not focused on diversifying the ranks of law professors as our fellowship, the Hasty Fellowship, is. I just want to close with a couple of thoughts about what we as law schools can do. First of all, those of us who've been in law teaching for a while, who served on appointments committees, as I have both at my former institution, Ohio State, and here at Wisconsin, know that more than anything else, what matters when at least most schools are evaluating candidates to become entry-level law professors, what matters most is your scholarship or your potential to produce great scholarship. And it's really vital for most people that they have some opportunity to clear their desks and have time to write, because it takes time, especially in the early stages when you're just starting off as a scholar, to figure out what it is you want to write about and to learn the trade. I mean, some people have experience writing scholarly papers when they're in law school, but I think nowadays, we're seeing people on the entry level market with multiple papers, sometimes, 5 or 6 papers, not always, but before they're entering law teaching. And it's very hard to compete if you don't have some sort of scholarly track record, even as an entry-level candidate, which makes it all the more essential that we as law schools take responsibility. I want to also note, you do have to be a little less traditional. I think we as law faculties do when we're trying to hire people. And I think we've done pretty well at the University of Wisconsin Law School. Another reason that I came here is because we actually are better than the numbers, or doing better than the numbers you heard earlier. A third of our faculty are people of color, a third of our tenure track faculty, that is, and that includes African American, Native American, Asian American, Middle Eastern, and Latinx members of our faculty. But of course, there is always room for improvement. And I just want to emphasize, I think this is something that we as a profession, as law professors, have to take responsibility for.
Okay, thank you very much, Dean, and thank you to all of our panelists for those very interesting initial remarks. Our format next calls for a chance for each panelist to make a comment on what they've heard from their colleagues or to put a question to a colleague. So we'll go back and begin with Judge Gregory. Would you like to offer a thought on what you've heard, or a comment or a question for one of your co-panelists?
Well, I think that it's almost like drinking from a fire hose. Is such a rich fountain of ideas. Professor Tokaji, I like that concept of, rather than saying finding qualified professors, obligation to create them. I think that's a wonderful spirit. And I was thinking about that. So often we always say that the whole idea is about looking and trying to find. And instead, the idea is that really that future is in our hands, in the institution's hands. And so I really like that. And my comment, Dean Farnsworth, is that I think if we could spread that idea in so many aspects of criminal justice, courts, that would be incredible, because otherwise it's always someone else's responsibility. And I think about, very briefly, just say this, one of the banes of my existence is to hear people say when asked, but do you have diversity of people of color? And they'll say many times, yes, we do, as long as they're qualified. Well, that's assumed. Do you ever say other people, so for example, it's like saying, well, we have, for example, whites if they're qualified. You never hear that. You never hear that. Why is that become sort of a catchphrase? That's because, in a sense, it's so easy to push that responsibility out there And if I don't find you, you don't exist. First of all, that's not true. And it's really backwards. But I love that concept, Dean. Thank you so much. I'll remember that. And I'll work to try to strive to fulfill that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge. And although I'm not sure it was quite put in the form of a question, I feel it's appropriate for me to ask the Dean if he wants to make a comment in response to the comment.
I really appreciate the Chief Judge's comment, and you know, maybe I'm going to spin it back to something that Judge Gilmore alluded to earlier. That it's really important, we all know, for us to create these networks and make a special priority to to prioritize diversity and inclusion where we're creating our networks. And so Judge Gilmore and all of you, I would love to be a part of your network because, you know, look, a big part of the way that people wind up in these jobs as law professors is by doing clerkships, and especially clerkships with distinguished jurists like all of you. And I've really tried in my former institution and here since I've been dean, although I'm really new, to try to encourage all of our students, but particularly our students of color, to think about clerkships, because those are paths to many different great careers in the legal profession, including but not limited to becoming law professors. So please take this as an invitation. I would love to be a part of all of your networks.
All right, excellent, thank you. Judge Costa, let's hear from you. Do you have a question or a comment in response to what you've heard?
Sure, I mean, one comment, and I think this goes to the Chief Justice's numbers, pointing out that, I mean, there seems to me there's really almost two sides of this. One is there aren't enough lawyers going into the legal profession, period, from communities of color. And then the second part is, but with the people we have, we need to make sure those opportunities are there. And I think part of this is a big systemic national issue. Before I became a lawyer and a judge, I taught fourth grade for a couple years through Teach for America. Much harder job than being a lawyer. I have a ton of respect for teachers, but I taught in one of the poorest counties in Mississippi, which makes it one of the poorest counties in the United States. And seeing, you know, the disparity in the educational opportunities in an impoverished community like that, and the ones that my three kids are getting these days here in Houston, you know, highlights how ingrained some of these challenges are. But I do think, so you see it across all industries, all groups, but I think the legal community, even more than others, really has to prioritize improving these opportunities, because we put lawyers themselves have a huge influence on society. And the law also produces so many lawyers in other capacities, right? And in legislatures and in so many different leadership and political positions. And it's, you know, that with our growing diversity, I think it's essential that the legal community plays a part to that. So I'm curious what, you know, just what other panelists think. Some have been mentioned, but what can be done to get more people of color into law schools, sort of at that first step, because I think we've mostly talked about the second step of what can we do once they're here to increase opportunities.
Let me just throw that open to the panel if any of the panelists want to jump in on it.
I will just second the comment. You know, I told Dean Baines this when he called me. From some of our perspectives, this is very frustrating because it's not for want of trying. For years, we've had a minority recruitment meeting during the legislative session, and a couple of senators have invited students from UT Law School, but also elsewhere, to come, and we all go over there and meet with them, and we try to get appellate judges from outside Austin to come. That is a little bit helpful, but not very much. And our court has an affirmative recruitment plan. All state Courts are required to have one by the legislature. We've had it for years. We're very serious about it. And yet it's just an elusive, trying to make a dent in it is just very frustratingly elusive. It just seems like we ought to be in a better place than we are.
All right.
I can jump in here too, because my response is related to the comment I was planning to raise. And that is that throughout the day today, I've been really struck by the synergies between the different panels and the ways in which there are a lot of similarities between people who are actively working to improve diversity in law schools, so how to increase enrollment of Black law students, for example. And then in the earlier panel, the one just before ours, that was focused on recruiting at firms. And then even among the people on this panel, I've learned so much from the judges speaking about efforts to improve diversity among the judiciary and among law clerks. And a lot of the concerns are really similar to what I've seen with regard to law faculty. And so, that brings us, I think, back to Judge Gilmore's earlier point again, which is that, these aren't new problems and the solutions aren't necessarily unattainable. I think what they require us to do is redefine somewhat how we determine who the best person for any particular job is. And so redefining merit does mean thinking about the credentials in slightly different ways. Kelly Testy, the president and CEO of LSAC, urged us to not rely on the LSAT for more than what it's worth. And I think that's true for a lot of our metrics. We don't know in legal academia, for example, that things like a clerkship are directly related to your ability to succeed as a law professor, where you need to demonstrate excellence in service, teaching, and scholarship. And yet we continue to rely on that as almost a prerequisite for consideration for the job. And so that's one thing I think that could be a solution that any one of us could employ in our individual capacities, but collectively could be useful for all of these different dimensions in the legal education system and in the legal profession. Just thinking a little bit beyond the traditional definitions of merit and the elite credentials that we generally rely on, to consider what other forms of merit and award might be.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Deo and Chief Justice Hecht, for those thoughts. Let me turn it over to Judge Gilmore for thoughts, comments, questions on what's been said so far.
Thank you so much, Dean Farnsworth. I heard what Chief Judge Gregory said about people saying, yes, we'll consider them if they're qualified. And for me, I get the same sort of visceral reaction. It's like, chalk on a chalkboard. I've always equated that with the soft bigotry of low expectations. When Justice Ginsburg passed recently, and they had that amazing picture of all of her law clerks standing on the steps of the Supreme Court, I was like shocked when I noticed. I was like, she didn't have any African-American law clerks like at all. And I didn't know that. I mean, it was a woman I greatly admired. So then I researched it to look. And in her 40-year history as a judge from the Court of Appeals and on the Supreme Court, she hired one African-American law clerk in 40 years, one gentleman who's now actually a judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in California. That was her only Black law clerk that she ever hired in 40 years. And so, it begs the question, why does that happen with judges? And on the one hand, it might be because they've made absolutely no effort to try to seek out a diverse class of law clerks. But on the other hand, it might be because they just didn't know how or what to do. And so to the extent that I hope that a lot of it is because people don't know how, may I just offer a few places where I have found people that I have greatly enjoyed working with over the years, because I think it's our responsibility as judges to share with our colleagues other ways that we have managed to find diverse candidates as well. An organization that Judge Gregory and I both participate in is called Just the Beginning, a pipeline organization. And it's an organization that is in Chicago. And one of the things that they do is they have a panel of judges who go and scour the country for qualified candidates of color that are looking for summer internships during their law school tenure. And they call all of the judges and they offer us these candidates. They've already pre-screened them. They've already interviewed them. They've already looked at their writing samples. They've already called some of their references. And so they've taken a lot of the work away from us having to do it. So I recommend to any of my colleagues that are looking to Just the Beginning, a pipeline organization out of Chicago. The American Bar Association has a great program. So the the JOIP program, Judicial Opportunities in the Legal Profession program. They have candidates that are available for internships for us, and they send us out a request every year asking us, are you willing to look at any of these candidates? And so if you're having trouble finding people, these are kids that are still in law school, but it's a great pipeline for you to look at them and create a good writer during the time that they work for you, as Professor Tokaji said, and have an opportunity to groom them as summer interns for the potential of them becoming actual law clerks after they get out of law school. In Houston, we have a similar program that's run by the Houston Bar Association. They call it the Moylet Program, Minority Opportunities in the Legal Profession Program. They ask us every year, would you be willing to take any candidates? And so I take somebody from Just the Beginning every summer. I take somebody from the American Bar Association every summer. I take somebody from the Houston Bar Association Moylet program every summer. And then the Federal Bar Association in Houston also has a program called the Hasty Fellowship. And it's an opportunity for students who need a job where they make some money in the summer, but they'd love to do a judicial internship, but they just can't afford it. They pay them a stipend. I think the stipend's up to $3,000 for a 6-week internship. That's a good little chunk of money for your summer. That maybe makes it possible for you to do another unpaid internship with somebody else if you have just a little bit of money. So to the extent that your Federal Bar Association has scholarship programs, I'm sure that most of them do, that's a great opportunity to get some students that might otherwise have to pass on an unpaid summer internship so that they can have a chance to get their foot in the door, and you can help create somebody who can become a law clerk later on, as the dean said. So those are just a few of the programs that I have used and taken advantage of. I think it's important for us to share that kind of information with our colleagues who may not be affirmatively looking for those programs, to know that they are out there and available to help you find students that are in the pipeline, on the way, in law school, that you can potentially create great prospective law clerks and lawyers from those pools.
All
I would
right.
just add on to what Judge Gilmore said. There are a lot of these programs out there that have a model for success in putting students of color into clerkships, into other opportunities. Another one, there's something called the Seo Fellowship, which is Seizing Every Opportunity. They bring in students of color who've been admitted to law school. So it's the summer before they're starting law school. And they prepare them for law school. They prepare them for and put them on the path towards clerkships, towards other jobs in the legal profession. And I've hired a student who went through that program. Over half of those students, all students of color going through this fellowship, end up with clerkships afterwards.
What's the name of it again, please, Judge Costa?
SEO, which stands for Seizing Every Opportunity.
Okay.
And so they're taking the students right before they start. So it's planning, it's help. I think all students who are first-time law students in their family, and it's putting, it's exposing them. Part of what we talked about, it's telling them, look, these clerkships are out there. That's a great thing. There's these summer jobs at law firms. That's out there. That's something you should target. So they're doing it on the front end. So they're going into law school with a lot of the goals and understanding that that my kid would have, being the kid of a lawyer, right? So they're trying to equal the playing field in that way. There's a group that I think just started in the last year called Law Clerks for Diversity, recognizing this problem we've all been talking about. It's clerks who are from minority backgrounds who serve as mentors to students who are looking for clerkships themselves, and they're trying to increase the exposure of clerkships and provide assistance on the path to clerkships. So I really think there are, and Judge Gilmore spoke about many of these programs, and I've had interns through some of those programs. So there are models that show the way that this can be done. I think it's just a matter of as Judge Gilmore said, making sure more judges are aware of that and become part of those programs, and expanding the programs so they serve more students. But there's proven successful models out there for tackling this problem.
Okay, well, thanks Judge Costa and Judge Gilmore for those great comments. Chief Justice Hecht, what would have been your thoughts?
I think those are very important steps, and I think we just need to redouble our commitments to take advantage of them. Again, as I said earlier, it's not for want of trying in many respects, and it's a little surprising to me when I look at the numbers that we haven't made more progress than we have. Either in the bar generally or in recruiting clerks. I totally agree with Chief Judge Gregory earlier. We look at backgrounds way beyond just the grade point average. Of course, you've got to be able to do the work, but we look at other strengths that people have to try to make sure that we're getting as a diverse a group of law clerks as we can. But all of these ways that can help would be very good for us.
Okay, great. Professor Deo, let me come back to you. We've heard a little from you, but let's hear a little more of a question or a comment you'd like to pose to any of your co-panelists.
Yeah, I'd love to hear actually how things have changed this year, if at all, under the pandemic. If there have been challenges that were maybe not anticipated earlier, and also some benefits. You know, we heard that you can have this opportunity now to invite clerks from all over the country, at least for the summer. I don't know how that works for the year, but I'm curious to know whether the challenges of this year have affected your chamber specifically, and if so, how?
Let me invite any of the judges to respond to that.
I'll dig in on that. We did go ahead and still decide as a court in Houston to go ahead and still have our summer interns last summer and to do them virtually. And so they did participate as summer interns. We never got to see them in person. We did everything online. We have a program that we do, a brown bag program. Every single week we have speakers that come in from different, from that have different and varying jobs. One week it'll be somebody from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. The next week it'll be somebody from the U.S. Attorney's Office. The next week it'll be somebody who is a staff attorney who does our prisoner civil rights work. The next week it'll be a bankruptcy judge. So every week we have a brown bag lunch with a different, different person. And so we did keep up with the brown bag lunches this past summer and just did it virtually. And the students logged in. You know, I really wondered and worried about whether or not they were going to get as much out of it as normally they would when they were in person. But I asked every single one I had 6 interns over the course of the summer, 3 first half, 3 second half, and I asked all of them the same thing. And all of them said that they still enjoyed the experience, that they still got a lot out of it, that they still got good feedback and comments on their writing from me and from my law clerks, that they enjoyed the brown bag lunches, even though they weren't in person. And they got to log in and watch proceedings in other judges' courts that were, in our courthouse. So they could just look online every day and see what the other judges were doing, and they could log in on Zoom and see what was happening in other courts. So they felt like they got something out of it. I felt like I missed the opportunity for that interaction with them. I like to take my summer interns out to lunch. I like to take them out for coffee, have real personal conversations with them. And so all that aspect of that was missing for me. And so I didn't feel like it was as good, but they still thought that it was good. So I guess it just depends on whose perspective you're seeing it from.
Interesting. Any other takers or comments on this one?
Professor Dale, I can tell you that it works even for elbow law clerks for the full term. I have a law clerk now, he's in California, and he hasn't stepped foot in my chamber except for when he interviewed with me. And it's working perfectly, even Pacific time versus Eastern time. Like Judge Gilmore, I missed the personal camaraderie, but we use Teams and we work. As a matter of fact, we're more proficient, I think, and rather than going down the hall now, I just click and they're right there and we talk. And so it's not the best, but it works very well, very well.
Good to hear.
Yeah,
All right.
I'll-
Chief Justice Hecht, go ahead.
I'll just say that that's our experience too. It works fine to have them all working from home. But we have our court is in the same building, all 9 of our judges, and legal staff and everybody is right here. And we have not been working in the courthouse since March 13th, when it really hit us here. They seem to be okay with that. The court's completely caught up in its work. In some respects, we're more efficient having people not have to come to the courthouse all the time. But we have a kind of a unique situation in that we let our clerks sit in on conference with us. And because we're all here on the same floor, it's a pretty close group working relationship. And I'll just second what the judges have said already, that without that, it's really hard to feel like we're building the camaraderie and the memories and the professionalism and the mentorships that we have always prided ourselves on.
All right. Thank you. And then Dean Tokaji, I'd like to give you a chance to offer a comment or a question to your co-panelists.
Well, let me just pick up with this theme of how things have changed in the pandemic. I think for those in the audience who may be on the law teaching market or considering going on the law teaching market, it's really quite different this year than it is in previous years. Usually there's this big conference that takes place in Washington, D.C. at a big hotel where all of the schools who are looking for people reserve a room. And all of the people who are on the entry level market are looking for jobs. And of course, we don't have any of that this year. So it's a different kind of process where the screening interviews are being done remotely rather than in person. And I suspect that few, if any, schools are going to be having in-person callback interviews, although I could be wrong about that. So it's a really different market. And, there's a smaller number of candidates this year than in past years when I've been looking. But, I will say at University of Wisconsin Law School, we have posted and are going to be looking for an entry level or less senior lateral candidates. And as is always the case for us, diversity is a really high priority. I hope that will be the case for lots of other schools. I think in light of the events that we've seen, including the killing of George Floyd, the shooting of Jacob Blake in our state in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and so many others, as well as the moral outrage over police violence towards people of color, especially African American men. I think I hope that many law schools will see that our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion is an important part of the solution of moving us towards greater racial justice. And so we'll also prioritize that in both our recruiting and in our efforts to create a pipeline of people to these great jobs like becoming judges and becoming law professors.
All right. Thank you very much.
If I could just add to what Dean Tokaji mentioned, we haven't mentioned this yet, and so I just want to make sure that it is included here. There is a new initiative spearheaded by 5 Black women deans, which is the Deans Anti-Racist Clearinghouse. And it is an opportunity for schools to put their action behind these words and commit to being truly anti-racist institutions. And so I really do applaud these leaders for starting this initiative and for leading us in this particular direction. Again, not only with words, but with really practical suggestions for what to do. Tailoring the importance of each phase to each school so that there's, the opportunity to listen and to learn, to educate one another, to audit their own institutions and think about how to improve, to think critically about how we ourselves are part of this larger process that we roundly do condemn. And so thinking about our own culpability in that and our own responsibility to making those improvements. So for those on the panel and also for those participating, if you haven't had a chance to look at that yet, I certainly urge you to look there too, just for a model for how to make change, not only that could apply to law schools, but that could apply to a number of different broad systems as well.
Thank you, Professor Deo. We've had some questions from viewers of this presentation, and I wanted to make sure we had time to put at least a couple of them in front of our panelists. One of the questions is this, that there are many law students who will go to faculty members seeking recommendations or advice about clerkships and will be discouraged from applying for clerkships or clerkships in certain courts because they'll be told you're just not competitive, that these judges need grades that are here, your grades aren't there, so there's no point in applying. I wonder if any of our panelists, especially the judges, wish to comment on this for the benefit of faculty who are giving advice in those situations, or otherwise comment on the problem.
Well, I think, I mean, especially in today's world where it's done electronically, there's not really much cost or effort in applying to more than, a great number of judges. I sort of view it the way I have a son who's a senior in high school right now, right? So you apply to colleges, you need to have an understanding of what your chances are, but you apply to some that are reaches that, my resume might not be quite up there, but still give it a shot. You never know. What's the harm in applying? And then, you apply to, but I do think for this is true for any student with any academic record of any background, if you really want to do a clerkship, you need to apply broadly. But I do think it never hurts to apply it. I just don't see really the downside of doing so.
Any other comments on this question?
Yeah, I do. I have a little checklist that my law clerks use to screen applicants that are applying for judicial clerkships. And it has a number of categories. It has grades, it has law school participation. Did you do moot court, mock trial, law review? Did you have a job? Did you intern or clerk for a judge during your time in law school? And also, did you do any public service work? Were you, did you volunteer or do something for somebody besides yourself? If I get 2 applications, all other things being equal, and one person has straight A's, but they didn't do anything for anybody but themselves, and I have another person who has, A's, but maybe a couple of B's, and, not every single grade is not an A, but they did a lot of public service work. They worked for a congressman. They worked on somebody's campaign. They did Teach for America, Judge Costa. They did something for somebody other than themselves, which means that maybe they didn't spend as much time studying, but their grades were decent, but all other things being equal, their GPA is a little bit lower than the person who didn't do anything. I'm taking the person who did some stuff for other people. I'm taking the person who did some public service work. I'm taking the person who interned for a congressman or who worked on a campaign or who did Teach for America over the person who had straight A's and didn't do anything for anybody else. So to Judge Costa's point, apply. You never know what judge you're going to get.
All right, very good. I have a question that I'd like to put to some of our panelists, which is, we sometimes have students who tell me their dream is themselves to be judges one day. Being a judge is a great and prestigious opportunity in our legal profession, as I'm sure you'd all hasten to agree. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on the kind of advice you'd give to somebody who has that eventual aspiration, because of course it's not the kind of aspiration that can be pursued in quite the same conventional and direct way as some others, and it takes a very long time to achieve if you're lucky enough to achieve it. But what do you say to a young person who looks at the job you have, judges, and would like to someday have such a job themselves, especially a student of color?
It's a public service job. If your primary motivation is money, it's not the life for you. It is a job of public service, and if you are really interested in it, then you have to show through your words and deeds that you are interested in public service. If you are not somebody who is in the community, active, trying to do things for other people, you won't be seen as the person who's right for a public service type job. It is a public service job. It's not for people that are money motivated. It's for people that see this as an opportunity to be of service in the community. Start early, showing that you're that person.
Any other comments from others?
Dean, I think I agree with what Judge Gilmore said. You have to get out there in the community. And I think as a lawyer, you have to make a reputation for yourself. And it's sometimes at odds with, going to the best firm and making the most money, but you're going to be the fifth person carrying the briefcase on the matter. Be somewhere where you're going to be the one responsible for the case, where you're going to be the one standing up in court. I gave up a high-paying firm job, went to the U.S. Attorney's Office, tried about 20 cases in federal court in a matter of 4 or 5 years, and that's without that I wouldn't have been at all considered for a judgeship. But I was, it doesn't really matter the type of case. I just think you have to be the one who's getting that responsibility, who's out there earning a reputation, doing things on your own at a fairly early point in your career. I think that's advice for not just wanting to be a judge, wanting to ultimately be successful in the practice of law or anything else, but thinking more about where are you going to get responsibility at an early stage in your career than what's the most prestigious firm or job to affiliate yourself with, because there's often an inverse relationship. I think, you go to some fancy New York law firm, you're not going to be making a reputation for yourself for decades, perhaps, right? Because there's just such a hierarchy there.
Indeed. I might like to put the same question or a similar one to our academic panelists and say, if we have students, let's say are recent graduates, but especially students who are in the audience today, who have dreams of an academic career, what's the advice you would give to them? Professor Deo, let me ask you first.
So I would advise them to think carefully about what kind of position they want to have. Just as Judge Gilmore was saying, to think about the reasons that they have for wanting to be an academic. So this is a position where most faculty members really love research and at least enjoy, if not really love, teaching. When I asked participants in my study what the best thing is about their law schools, the most common response I got is that they love their students. And so if that's the kind of thing you want to do, then academia is definitely a good fit. In terms of preparing for that, it's hard to say right now because the credentials have increased so significantly. Probably the best predictor is, as Dean Tokaji mentioned, people who are already writing. There are a lot of people who are on the entry-level market who have published substantially today. I would say 10, 20, certainly 30 years ago, it was unusual to have maybe any publications, and now it's much more the norm to have at least one or two, if not more than that. And so often, if someone is still a student, I would certainly encourage them to consider joining a law journal, whether it's the Law Review at the school or another journal at the school, because there you have an opportunity to really engage with innovative and cutting edge research to get a sense of whether that's something you yourself want to do. And it also gives you an opportunity to think about some of those cutting edge issues, because usually what journals are publishing are kind of at the forefront of what academics themselves are working on. So that would be, I think, a great place to start in terms of assessing whether it is a good fit personally.
Dean Tokaji, any thoughts from you?
Sure. The most important thing is to work on your scholarship, I would say. That may not be fair or right, since a big part of what we do, arguably the most important part, is teaching. But what law school hiring committees tend to prioritize highest is your potential to be a great scholar, one who's going to have an impact. And the best indicator of that, at least in the view of most hiring committees, is what have you produced so far? So having published work in law reviews especially is going to be the greatest thing that attracts people and gets you at least in the door for a preliminary interview. Now, for those who are law students right now and thinking about a career in law teaching, I would suggest that you not only try to do some writing and get some practice producing legal scholarship while you're a law student, but that you work on cultivating relationships, because these networks in the legal academy, as in any other field, are really important. And the professors that you get to know as law students may be able to help you later. For those both who are in law school and for people who graduated from law school and are maybe practicing lawyers or law clerks and are considering careers in law teaching, you know, there's the route of also getting a PhD, which is, of course, a many years enterprise, but also will provide you the opportunity to hone your writing. But there are also many schools, as I noted earlier, in addition to our school, the University of Wisconsin Law School, that have some sort of fellowship or visiting assistant professor program. And if you go on the AALS website, they have a directory of fellowships and VAPs, as they're called, visiting assistant professorships. These are great opportunities for you to develop your writing as well as your teaching, and to prepare you to go on the entry-level tenure track market. So I'd really urge people, because it's really difficult to carve out the time to get that writing done if you've got a full-time job as a law clerk or a practitioner. I mean, I did it way back when in 2002 when I went on the market, and it basically meant I spent a bunch of weekends in the UCLA Law Library trying to write the article that became my job talk. But it's really hard to do it that way. And as Meera mentioned, the standards have really become more demanding because we see so many candidates with substantial publication records. So you've really got to clear some space to get that writing done.
Well, thank you, Dean. That's, I think, a lot of great advice from you and Professor Deo. We've got just 1 or 2 minutes left. Let me just invite any panelists who have any remaining remarks or questions they'd like to put out there, give them a chance to do that. Anything else? Okay, well then I'll just thank all of you so much. Chief Judge Gregory, Judge Costa, Judge Gilmore, Chief Justice Hecht, Professor Deo, and Dean Tokaji. Thank you for a wonderfully interesting conversation about a very important, very urgent set of issues. And I want to thank again Dean Baines and Dean Collins for putting this great program together. And I believe we'll be hearing from at least one of you now. So thanks again to our great panel for a wonderful discussion.
Well, good evening. I think Dean Collins is going for me, so.
I am here and I am ready. I want to say thank you to all of you. It has been an absolutely incredible day of learning and listening, and I cannot imagine a more important conversation for our profession to be having at this critical moment in time. Thank you to all the attendees for spending your day with us. It is our hope that we have left you with concrete strategies and takeaways that you can implement in your own institutions. And we hope that you will consider joining us for future conversations about how we can promote greater equity, diversity, inclusion, and justice in our profession. If you only take one thing away from today, I hope it will be this: dare to do things differently. Because if we keep doing what we have been doing, we will not make the change that our profession so desperately needs to see. I want to thank all our moderators and presenters. I learned so much from each and every one of you today. And thank you to the incredible teams at LSAC, SMU, and Houston who have worked tirelessly to make this day possible. Most important, thank you to my friend and colleague, Dean Len Baines. Without your energy, vision, and commitment, today would not have been possible. You are an inspiration, and it has been an absolute joy to work with you on this project. I know this is not the end of our work together. I think Kelly Testy made that plain, but instead just the beginning. From the bottom of my heart, thank you to you and to everyone who has made today possible.
Thank you so much, Dean Collins. It's been a pleasure working with you and working with SMU School of Law, Dedman School of Law, for your leadership in this area. It's always nice to have a partner and working on these difficult issues. And so I'm delighted that we're able to join forces to identify solutions of underrepresented students of color in our law schools and our law firms, our legal profession, the judiciary, and so many other ways. And as we celebrate the 70th anniversary of Heman Sweat's integration of UT Law School, it's really important for us to remark his incredible courage and fortitude, and realize how difficult things must have been for him way back then. And to recognize that if he was able to do what he was able to do at that time, when things were so stacked against him, then imagine what we can do now, where things are much more open and people are much more open to progress and moving forward. So I think of all I think of our leaders who have come before us, who really made the opportunities available for me and Dean Collins, that but for their efforts, we wouldn't be in the positions we are here today. But there's still a lot of work to do. As Dean Collins said, we're committed to continue having these conversations. And I'm hopeful because progress has been made. And I would not, as I mentioned, I would not hold this position, but for the progress that our society has made. And I feel personally committed to this. And I feel that there's an obligation for us to give back to those who may not have the same abilities and voices that we have. And our goal, and the goal of the conference, and all of you who've been there, is to make sure that we are fully integrated, that with lawyers of color and judges of color, academics of color, that everyone is able to use their full potential that God had given them. And that's all we want, is to make sure that our profession is diverse of people who are very talented. And there's so many important messages today, but one of the things I want to mention is I think what Professor Meyerson mentioned and said at his panel on pipeline programs, that we have to be a talent search. This is not about diversity, it's about a talent search. And we may sometimes have to create the talent and develop the talent in order to find the talent that we need. And I urge and encourage all of us to treat this as a talent search, to seek out those individuals who have the raw skills and make them the lawyers, law professors, deans, faculty members that we want them to be. And we're here committed to helping you do that, because otherwise, as Dean Collins said, we'll be in the same situation we are now. We'll be complaining about the same issue 10, 20 years in the future. And many thanks to the UH staff who have worked tirelessly with the SMU staff, the Dean's office, the IT office, the alumni, communications, marketing, and so many others for helping us put together this conference. Many thanks to Law School Admissions Council and Kelly Testey's leadership, Gail Withers' leadership for sharing their technological assistance with us to make this webinar run flawlessly and smoothly. And many thanks to Bracewell LLP for the financial support of our keynote speaker, Professor David Wilkins of Harvard Law School. And many, many thanks to all our other sponsors who helped make this conference a success. And again, thank you all our speakers, panelists, and moderators for doing an absolutely tremendous job. I've learned a lot in the process of the day. So many, many thanks. You will see the sponsorship list. I'm gonna, and also if you're trying to get CLE credit, then we will have a slide with the CLE information that will show with a QR code and a number for CLE. So again, thank you so much. This is a start of a very important conversation, which we hope to continue as we move forward to progress for a day where hopefully we won't have to have these conversations because diversity will happen naturally. So thank you so much for your participation.
you.